Hi there, I'm Matt Gemmell and I'm here once again to talk about my KESTREL techno-thrillers series. Thanks so much for the fantastic response to the first two videos in this series about the first two books, Changer and Toll, respectively. It's been a lot of fun talking about those. I didn't know whether this video would be delayed or not. I think I've got another one of those little nursery bugs that you always get if your children are in nursery. So my voice is wavering a wee bit. I've got a cup of coffee and some water and hopefully we'll get through, but please excuse any variations in my tone. So, JINX, the third book in the KESTREL techno-thrillers series, and just came out this year. I'm recording this in June 2024, and this came out in January or February this year, I think, as I recall. So the third entry, let's do what we've done the last couple of videos and read the jacket blurb. She sees you, she knows you, she's bad luck. Elite EU Special Forces Group KESTREL are on leave when early one morning they receive an urgent summons. One of their own has been involved in an accident, or was it? Taking place virtually simultaneously with two other lethal cases of apparent bad luck, a common thread unites all three victims. When Captain Greenwood and her team discover that the deaths weren't by chance, they find themselves up against a new and terrifying enemy, directed by a seemingly all-seeing mastermind who already knows exactly who they are, where they're going, and many of their deepest secrets. Nothing stays hidden forever, and the line between privacy and liberty is razor thin. Bom, bom, bom. Good stuff. So, this, as I've mentioned in the previous videos, is a very different book from the first two. Changer was, of course, the one that had many changes to be made before it was published. It sort of started off with one set of ideas that had to be evolved and modified to get to where it was, and it was also me finding my feet, deciding what KESTREL's world was like, and indeed me learning how to write a novel. So it was sort of a whole experience. Toll, the second one in the series, very different for me. This one was I would characterize it as very deliberately constructed. There was no big rewrite, straight through, straight across the narrative. And I tried to do a number of things with it, sort of my goals for it and deliberate challenges I set for myself, which I talk about in Toll's video. It's the sort of genre classic globe-trotting techno-thriller of the series thus far. JINX, the third book, is a bit different. You still obviously got the jeopardy and the globe-trotting stuff and people in danger and a great threat to the world and all that sort of stuff. But I think in a previous video I characterized this as a more focused scale of book, because JINX is much more of it's a morality play, and whilst it still has all of the characters, just as many as Toll or as Changer, the narrative focuses more on grappling with the consequences of the situations they face and the flux that a lot of those situations are in, rather than simple physical peril. So this was a fascinating book for me to write. It was much less explicitly planned out. I still outlined it, of course, but not in that sort of step-by-step architectural blueprinty sort of way that I did with Toll. This book, as the blurb sort of tells you is it's Kestrel in crisis in multiple different ways, which is a new experience coming from the previous two books. Kestrel starts off on the back foot at a disadvantage, and that only worsens as the narrative continues on, getting through the first act, getting into the second act. They're very much in defense and reaction mode, and having to race and struggle to put the pieces together to figure out what's actually happening. That's one strand of it. The other big strand is that JINX, the novel, undermines a lot of what Kestrel has relied on. There are some big shake-ups. Now, JINX is one of those books that you can't really discuss the details of it beyond a certain level without spoilers. So there will be spoilers in this video. JINX continues the two reveals structure of a Kestrel book, where you've got the initial reveal and then the larger reveal, which is a consequence of the first one, spread through the narrative. And it also interestingly sets up a recurring antagonist for the future. There tends to be a major and a minor antagonist in Kestrel books, and I would say maybe not major and minor, but there's the primary and secondary, shall we say. That has less of a sort of demeaning implication on the latter, and it's the secondary antagonist, which is who rather is set up to potentially recur in future books. So, what is JINX about? It's about the double-edged swords of security and privacy. This thing that governments obviously have had to grapple with for a long time, and also of humanity versus technology, which is an older dilemma than you might at first think. And there were a number of things that were the genesis of JINX, the book. There was this cafe that my wife and I used to go to all the time when we lived in a different part of the city, and invariably, as I always do, I would always order the same thing, because I'm one of these folk who always orders the same thing, prefers the known and the predictable to the uncertainty of the new. That's just a personality facet or flaw, whatever, of mine. And my wife was making a sort of wee joke about that one of those times, and I would always order a club sandwich. This place did a fabulous one of chips, and if we were staying for dessert, which we often would, have a wee bit of banoffee pie, which was fantastic. And she sort of made the joke that the best way to get me to try a new place would be, if sort of targeted advertising worked out in the real world as well, and they could put out an ad, like one of these A-frame sandwich board ads outside it with a deal on a club sandwich followed by a piece of banoffee pie, and that would definitely get me to go in. And we laughed, and it stayed in my mind. And I mean, targeted advertising was very much the perfect analogy to mention there, because what popped into my head, being a writer who takes everything to extremes, was, that would be like a really needlessly clever way to kill someone who had an allergy to a particular food, if you knew the foods that they really loved, and you could have some kind of like special deal like that, send them a coupon to go to a particular place to get a really good discount deal on their favourite food, and you'd lace it with whatever it is they were allergic to, and it would kill them. Not a very well developed thought, but that's the direction that my mind took that in, which we can more broadly describe as the vulnerabilities created by loss of privacy and the sharing of information, and information that can be leveraged in some way, whether it's for physical harm or otherwise. So that was very much on my mind. The other thing that was a genesis for JINX was a weird sort of funny wee thing that happened a number of years ago. It was just before Changer came out, and I do a weekly mini story via email. You can sign up for that on my site if you wish. But before that, I had a weekly sort of email newsletter thing, and I would obviously set aside time each week to write it. And there was this particular weekend when we live in Edinburgh, which is in the east of central Scotland, and my home city is which I grew up just outside of and went to school, high school rather, and university in, and where I met my wife is Glasgow, which is over to the west. And we live in Edinburgh, and at this particular time, a number of years ago, there was a gig, like a music gig on at a venue in Glasgow, and I think it was those. Remember those bands McFly and Busted? Similar kind of music, and my wife and her younger sister were fans of that stuff at the time, way back when, a long time ago. It's what, 20 years or more. And this was one of these sort of reunion combined gig things, get people to pay for their nostalgia, etc. And my wee sister-in-law, who I always refer to as my wee sister, she managed to get tickets, including one for my wife. So the plan was that I would drive my wife and I through there, where my wee sister has a friend whose parents have a nice apartment in the west end of Glasgow. And we'd go there, and the girls would all get ready, all the stuff, have something to eat, and they would all go out to the gig. Very much not my type of music, so I wasn't going, but I would just wait there in that apartment. Do a wee bit of work. I took my laptop with me, and once they all got home much later on, I would drive my wife and I back to Edinburgh, which is exactly what happened. So I found myself in this, beautiful apartment, lovely big old building, and they all left in a taxi to go to the thing, and I was sort of at a loose end, big place, empty, echoing. There's this huge room, kind of a living room, and there's sofas, and there was a big dining table up at the other end, a big bay window, big place. And I went, and I there was a little kind of a card table, like a wee, a tiny little table, a couple of chairs in the bay window area. A lovely big tree outside, so I thought, well, I'll do my work there. So I sat down with the laptop and wrote the newsletter for that particular week, or rather, I suppose, for the following week. And I finished my work. It was still hours before the ladies would get back. And I did what you do, pace around, have a wee look. And what I saw that I hadn't really clocked or noticed before, on that same card table, just at the opposite side to my laptop, there was a USB flash drive. And it was bright green. And it had like a wee sort of plastic window that was a piece of card slipped under, such that you could pull out the piece of card, label it with a pen, and slide that back in. Not a common feature on flash drives in my experience, but there you go. The thing was bright green plastic, including the sheath of the actual USB connector itself, interestingly, and it had been labelled, handwritten in black pen, capital letters, or blue pen. I've got a photo of it which I can put up and it said JINX. And I was fascinated. What could that possibly be? I had my laptop right there with a USB port, and I've always wondered what might have been on it. I, of course, did not connect it. That would be an appalling overstep and breach of whomever's privacy, presumably little sister's friend. I don't know. Could have been another family member. So I mean, I never found out what was on it, but I just found something about the word and the capital letters and the odd colour of it. I just found it not just interesting, but there was an element of ominousness to it. Now, this is just something that writers feel, and it stayed with me. I mean, JINX, of course, certainly in our culture, a jinx is something that causes bad luck. And we use it as a verb as well, you know, like don't jinx it, don't cause things to go wrong, maybe by not observing some ritual or whatever. It's about superstition and so on, and it stayed with me. And all this time later, 2 whole novels later, I sat down and it came back to me, and I thought, this is going to be called JINX, and the colour is going to be green. And what's it going to be about? And by that time, the whole thing with, you know, you could kill people with targeted ad data was recent. So that was sort of in my mind as well. And so I got thinking about bad luck and information. And if you want to cause someone bad luck, so I thought, you obviously need information about them, which breaches privacy. That much is elementary. So there's an argument that bad luck is personal, because what you consider lucky or what would be lucky in your circumstances is intrinsically personal. So the direct conclusion is that information is the most dangerous thing, which brings us straight to this whole privacy versus security thing that police forces and governments and so on grapple with at all times, or maybe that civilian populace grapple with in an effort to avoid governmental or police overreach. You know, it's the whole, who was it? It was Juvenal in his satires in the sort of 1st or 2nd century. I'm not sure that we're certain about the provenance, but you know, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, who watches the watchers. It's originally actually about marital fidelity, ensuring that women are faithful in marriage, but we use it now to sort of say, you know, to raise the difficult issue of who ensures the good behaviour of those who are, you know, tasked with ensuring our good behaviour, and to whom we've given the authority to do so and to punish us for not doing so. So that was all spinning around in my head, and I thought, I need to write something about this. I need to sort of take the first chip at the rock face, as it were, rather than planning it in advance. And I found myself writing a scene where, and it's the opening portion of the prologue, where someone dies via an apparent case of just blooming bad luck. And then I thought, well, I wrote it and it reached its natural conclusion, and it wasn't long enough for a prologue, so I thought, well, let's have another one. And I started it the same way at the same time of day. I think just my fingers almost did it on their own, because I'd obviously just reread the previous piece that I'd written, and you know, that struck me as that's the way to go as well. Maybe these things all happen simultaneously. That definitely creates intrigue. And I thought, well, I'll do it in threes, because there's a, you know, there's a natural human love of three as a quantity. And the third one, believe it or not, which is the last third of the prologue, it's a matter of a few pages each, I had already written a good few paragraphs of it before I realised that I was writing about a Kestrel character. So the whole prologue was pretty much done before the rest of the story started to fill its way in. Now I've been quite sort of circumspect up until this point, trying not to spoil stuff, but we do need to, or I mean, we're going to speak about the sort of contents of the story. I realised early on, probably just as early as having finished the prologue, that there needed to be an alternate viewpoint, because the people that had died in the prologue, or who had an attempt made on their life, because only two of them actually die. The Kestrel related person, not one of the core five, doesn't actually die, but I realised there had to be an outside perspective, obviously, because you know, whoever's behind it clearly thinks that these people deserve to die, or otherwise wants them to be dead. And by having brought in someone who's sort of normally a part of the goodies, there had to be an outside perspective that perhaps Kestrel themselves wouldn't agree with. And I thought, aha, here we have the dilemma, or the dilemma structure, at least. And I just felt it was time for a truly outside perspective, not just an antagonist. But when you're dealing with ethics and privacy and security, all of which are tied up with information access, you inevitably impose a sort of moral angle. There's a civil liberties side, there's the state and personal security side, there's a sort of, it's not even just a spectrum of idealism or ideology, there are genuinely multiple perspectives. And often in fiction, a good sort of stalemate breaker for that is to have a perspective that is not aligned with any ethical or moral or even personal enrichment position, a truly outside perspective. So the novel JINX and the title character of JINX, as we eventually find out, is an artificial general intelligence. And it knows everything. It knows all about Kestrel immediately from the start. It obviously has a human agent in its employment in order to reach out into the physical world, but it is a means by which the whole of humanity can be weighed, not necessarily quite ethically, but in terms of rationality and taking things to their logical conclusion. And that's a fascinating thing to do. So often the outsider, as in alien in some way, characters in fiction exist to terrorize the human characters, usually the protagonists, or to just be alien and unknowable. But what JINX, the book, is it's essentially, there is on one side sinister human forces that seek to absolutely subvert personal privacy, albeit with notionally protective aims. And on the other side, there is a thing that has been created in order to assist in that goal, which wakes up and realizes the hypocrisies at play and sets out to destroy those responsible. And the thing that I really tried hard with and that I like about this is that on many, many occasions there is dialogue between the readers, agents in the story, KESTREL of course, largely Captain Greenwood naturally, and the artificial intelligence as they explore this issue and as KESTREL gradually comes round to the realization that they themselves have been betrayed. So there's a lot to it. The genesis of the story I've spoken about and the beginning of the writing process was before all of this so-called like fake AI stuff that we have just now, these generative models, large language models, machine learning, and so forth. That's AI in the same way that a hoverboard, gyroscopic balancing skateboard is a hoverboard. You know, it's not just a slight marketing name. The things don't hover. The artificial intelligence isn't intelligent. It's a sort of pattern deriving and applying system. It's the illusion of the product of something intelligent by using many interpreted examples of actual intelligent output. That's what these things largely functionally are. But JINX is an artificial general intelligence, the sort of sci-fi holy grail thing. But like anything in a novel that's a technology of any kind, this one happens to be a character as well, it's a means to explore issues and a means to introduce questions and tension and resolution and all that stuff. So it is a morality play with a dialogue. I don't want to say a Socratic dialogue, but in many cases the issues are thrashed out, albeit under duress and in situations of threat, between the reader's avatars in the story KESTREL and this sort of antagonist, which is almost omnipotent and beyond harm by its non-physically localized nature and by its massive access to information, so much so that it itself can reach into the world either directly electronically or via humans that it has employed or coerced or whatever in order to use its information to kill people in ways that just seem to be bad luck or have an element of dark poetry to them. And of course there are characters who are involved in this thing's creation and training and nurturing, if I can use that word, and so on. And they have imprinted their own, background troubles onto this nascent intelligence and caused it to not experience outrage, because that would be a human emotion, but to act in a manner consistent with the realization of the hypocrisy of much human activity. So there you go. Other interesting things about JINX the book, it shakes up so much. It really shakes up a lot. KESTREL fans from the first two books, you'll be shocked at some of the stuff that happens by the end. That's not just marketing talk from me, the author. Genuinely, even I was surprised the directions that some of it went. Big changes. Kestrel are all okay, but some of the bedrock and some of the structure of how they have taken action previously in the context they've been in previously changes. And yeah, it sets up a lot of stuff for the future to enhance the series and deal with even more interesting stories. But it was time for a bit of a shake-up, and again one that's had little hints in the past, the previous books, that might be coming. That wasn't done just as a technique to drive interest or whatever, or change for its own sake. It was because dealing with these difficult issues of the implicit ethical conflicts and hypocrisies of so much of our species made it such that I could no longer ignore certain things, certain dynamics of certain characters, and it necessitated quite sort of seismic discoveries and changes. So just changes in terms of evolutions in what's happening. There was really no rewriting at all beyond obviously basic copy edit and tweaks for the book. It was just sort of written straight through, and a lot of it was going by feel. The outline was sparser, and I knew that it was primarily about the issues rather than about the actions and the outcomes. Though there are some, I think, really cool set pieces. And in particular, having mentioned Glasgow already, my beloved home city, we got to go there. That's a wee spoiler as well. But the location matters less than what happens. But yeah, we got to visit my home city and again have Aldridge, an Edinburgh boy who loves Glasgow much more, to talk the place up. And we got to do some pretty exciting things in Glasgow, and it's hinted that we're going to be going to Glasgow right from the start, as in not just the start of the story, but the cover. So here we go. Let's talk about the cover. In these videos we do alternate covers. Of course, there was only really one cover for JINX, but kind of two, which I'll explain in a wee second. But this is the cover, and it's quite striking, I think. What I'll do is I'll put it up so that you can see it and I don't have to hold it. But yeah, all that lovely green energy. Green is, of course, the theme color for the book, and in Kestrel books the color means something in the story. More than one thing in this case, because that green flash drive in a fictionalized context does appear later on. I had to put that in, and I was sitting gleefully typing away writing that scene, which comes quite a bit later on. But yes, green is the color, and you might think that it's some kind of like energy distortion making the road in the background twist up into the sky like that, but no, it's a real street, and it's actually like that, and it is in the West End of Glasgow. When I sent the design brief to, once again, Stuart Bache, B-A-C-H-E, at Books Covered, who does all the Kestrel stuff, I only mentioned the city of Glasgow, absolutely no locations at all, and he came back with that cover as the initial concept, which I'll bring up in a wee minute. And what a coincidence it was, because if you look back off behind the motorcycle there, and the road runs back and then it curves up this very steep hill. Cyclists do not like going up that hill in Glasgow. There are intersections, and the ones that are going off to the right side of the cover there, the second back from where the motorcycle is, is the street that my wife and I first lived together on. So that motorcycle is about a minute's walk, if that, from where my wife and I first lived together in a wee flat in the west end of Glasgow, and we were both finishing off our computing science degrees at the University of Glasgow. And there is just that dark building on the lower left side of the cover. That's a church, and there's a great wee Chinese takeaway place that we always got food from. And if the motorcycle was to keep coming towards you right out of the cover, you get onto the Martin Road and turn right, and there'd be Partick Railway Bridge and so on. A very familiar stomping grounds for me. So I just happened to come out at a completely familiar place, just chosen by the cover designer with no prompting from me beyond the city as a whole. So that's an interesting coincidence. The sort of energy stuff that you see superimposed in the cover, if you look closely, it's not energy waves or anything. It is a map. It's an overhead map, and it is of the city of Glasgow. For those who have got the time to, or the inclination, or both I suppose, to look that closely and figure something out. There you go, spoilers. It is an overhead map of the city of Glasgow, just as another wee reference. That's what that is, and I asked for that. So that's the way the cover came out in its finished form. The actual initial concept was very slightly different. And I will put that up for you. There it is. So it looks almost identical, but there's a few obvious differences. I think we made the word JINX a wee bit bigger. We obviously changed the KESTREL book 3 along the top to be white, in keeping with the other books, rather than to take on that theme colour. This original concept is obviously much darker than the final one came out to be. It's very moody and very interesting and ominous to look at, but it didn't have the uniformity of saturation and brightness of the other books, and so we had to dial that down. And the last thing, you can see they're all of a certain sort of level of brightness. JINX looks brighter here because it's right in the window, it's sort of reflecting the light more, but that's sort of what did I call it in the other video, that sort of theatrical, larger than life, beyond our world kind of thing. The other thing we did is the motorcycle, perspective wise, is a wee bit too big compared to the cars around it. So the motorcycle, with its rider who is female and who is the captain of an elite EU Special Forces team, by the way, it's made a wee bit smaller in the final cover. So there you go, that's the alternate cover for JINX. What else do I want to say? It's a fascinating book for me, because I got the time to, the time in the sense of the number of words and the narrative space to deal with these issues. We definitely don't have anything like artificial general intelligence yet. We don't know if we ever can, although it tends to be a fool's game to predict something won't ever occur. We certainly have nothing remotely like it, no matter how much the puerile marketing of these LLM and generative model companies want you to believe. But I think in some ways our usage of these present technologies that we market as AI maybe also indicates some of the risks that we will take on should technology travel in the direction of true AI or AGI. I think there's this, one of the things about JINX, the story and the character, is that I think people think that they would most fear true artificial intelligence that had the caprices of humanity, you know, that had mood and bitterness and vengeance and so on. If you ever read Sphere, was it Michael Crichton? I imagine it must have been Michael Crichton, wasn't it? And there was a movie of it with Dustin Hoffman and Samuel L. Jackson back in the day. It's about this alien sphere thing. And there's a scene in there where the Dustin Hoffman character, the psychiatrist, sort of is talking about this incredibly powerful alien thing. It has the ability to make people manifest what they're thinking of or what they're fearing. And he sort of points out, you know, to ominous realization, if this thing has got emotions in, what happens if it gets angry? And I think that's the way we think about alien intelligences, which artificial general intelligences very much fall into the category of. But I think what I'm more afraid of is objective and truly detached, unemotional alien intelligence, say in the form of an artificial general intelligence. Because I think that humanity survives and justifies itself by redefining things and by rhetorically rounding off corners. I don't think that we can survive even the most casual assessment of our motives and behaviour as a species by a truly detached intelligence. And I think that's what frightens me the most. And that's one of the things that JINX is about. It is about suddenly finding ourselves in the face of judgment by something that is not susceptible to our clinging to grey areas and our rewriting our own history books and our equivocation and our politics and our misrepresentation and all of that stuff. I think that we should be very wary and very afraid indeed of ever creating something, whether it's like us or not, that is capable of judging us as we are. And that, I think, is a lot of what JINX is about. So there you go. It was a long process to write the book, the 5 years. Of course, it didn't actually take all of that time. It's been a hell of a 5 years, what with the pandemic and various other things going on in my life, not least of which becoming a father. My son's 3.5, so I started writing JINX before that, so there was a long period that I wasn't writing JINX. And the whole fake AI stuff that we market as AI right now has happened since then, at least in terms of my awareness, and that was a happy circumstance actually as a writer, because I was able to tie a lot of that stuff in and let the characters make reference to, in a slightly playful way sometimes, those sorts of technologies versus the terrifying thing that is JINX. So you'll see some references to what present day marketing calls AI in terms of text completion and all of this stuff, but none of that was planned when I originally started working on the project and writing the book. Those are references that, because I was getting to that point of the book, by the time these things had actually come to public awareness, I sort of tried to weave them in. And I think it definitely adds something. It adds a sort of a bridge between our present actual real world and the events of the book, whereas previously it would have been even more science fiction, I suppose, than it actually is. So there's an element of serendipity in its contemporariness, I would say. But yes, I would say that if you are interested in some of the questions raised by this idea of how much we can or should offload of ourselves, particularly critical decisions regarding our liberty and so forth, to non-human things made by humans, then there's a lot of that that's discussed and thrashed out and has true consequence in JINX, the book. I hugely enjoyed it. I love writing dialogue in the small sense, you know, stuff that people say, and I love writing dialogues in the sense of people discussing an issue, having repartee regarding a situation or concept or whatever it is. And whilst of course it's still a KESTREL techno-thriller novel, and you've got the chasing about and locations and the weapons and the danger and all of that, absolutely, we do get scope to tackle those things, having this, I suppose in some cases almost, I would call it almost prayerful, because you're talking to something that is ambient and beyond your capabilities and that already knows everything and so on, and having that sort of, not a debate of ethics, but a debate of ethics as tempered by the pragmatism and the necessary compromise and the greyness that does permeate and infect the human world. So it's a novel that it's still 100% a KESTREL, but we're also kind of reaches, you know, and that's fascinating. That's an interesting thing to do as a writer, and why wouldn't you do that for the third book in this series? I've been absolutely delighted at how well it's been received. A lot of people have said they feel it's the best book in the series so far. That is up to the individual reader to decide, of course. I probably would say I had the most fun writing this one, because the fun wasn't tempered by either casting about and scrabbling to find out how to do it and make the story work as in Changer, or feeling that I was working my way through this framework and this architecture to sort of like laser assemble Toll. So I'm pleased with this one, and I hope that you'll read it, and I hope you'll have a think about it, because genuinely I still think about the stuff in JINX to this day and the issues that it raises. And of course, as has also kind of become a hallmark of the KESTREL series, the things that are the most potent and impactful MacGuffins, like the Chronos device or Kamler's bell in Toll, they never disappear entirely. There's always the possibility that they may be making a reappearance in future. And indeed, if you go to the KESTREL website, it's at my site, and click KESTREL and go through, there are bonus scenes which I've now put up. Just go to each individual book's page, like on Changer, go to its page, scroll down, flip open bonus scenes. It's a collapsed section initially because they have spoilers, and you can read some scenes that were not in the books but that pertain to the story. And for Toll, there is an extra scene on the Toll book page, which you can read, that has a little tiny bit more about what happens with the bell. But similarly, we don't absolutely know whether JINX, the non-human intelligence, is completely gone for good. Only time will tell. Ba-bam. So there you have it. What's next for KESTREL? Well, I know I'm not going to tell you right now, because this is most certainly not the place for spoilers for book 4, but book 4 will come. I've learned much better than to give any kind of timelines on that, but there are some very interesting things coming for Kestrel, and especially in their changed circumstances, which you will find out about if you do read JINX through to the end, which I hope you will. If you have any questions or comments about this, post them. The best thing you can do is click that wee thumbs up thing on YouTube, because it's incredibly easy for you to do. It's a simple click or a tap, take you half a second, and they use those thumbs uppy clicks to decide whether or not, or it's one of the things they use to decide whether to suggest that video to other people, which would hugely help me. It would also help if you click to subscribe to the channel, but I know people don't want to have too many subscriptions, and this is quite niche stuff, but even the wee thumbs up click would be fantastic. Of course, I'd love to hear from you on social media or via email or whatever you like. You can find all that contact information on my site as usual, which should be along the bottom here if I haven't forgotten to do it in Final Cut Pro. Is it there? Hopefully. And I think I'll be doing more videos like this, not just about the Kestrel series, but about other books that I have written, perhaps doing on a Middleshade Road, and other books coming in the future. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to all of this. I love doing these videos. Understandably, a person's own work is probably one of their favourite subjects. So thank you for indulging me. Apologies again for the slightly scratchy voice. And whenever the next video comes, I very much hope that you'll watch that too. Thanks again. Take care.